When Baltany released their 36mm date just homage, I didn't really care for it too much. It's not really a design that has ever really spoken to me or grabbed my attention, and being 36mm felt just a touch too small for me, but there was just something about it that kept getting my attention. There was something about it that kept me taking me back to look at the Baltany watches and specifically look at this watch. So many times, in fact, that I ended up just having to buy one and get it into my collection. And what has turned out to be a decision that I made based on me just being drawn back into it has turned out to be my favorite Baltany of all time and one of my absolute favorite AliExpress watches of all time. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And I've had this watch in my collection for quite a few months now, and it really has become an important watch to me, a watch that I absolutely love. And I just saw that Baltany has released another version of it. It is a watch that looks essentially the same, has the same dimensions, yet it has a couple of key differences to it. A different bezel, a different bracelet, and maybe a couple of other very minor tweaks. And when I was looking at this, I got an email from Baltany and they said, hey, we've got this new version of the date just homage. We'd love for you to review it. And since I was already loving and enjoying my version, I said, yes, please, that would be great. It'd be great to not only feature my favorite Baltany watch, but also see the other variation and feature both of them in this review video. But because they sent out that version to me, you would have seen that sponsored icon earlier in the video, and I'm going to leave links to the Baltany website and to their AliExpress store below. But I want to talk to you about this watch, well, specifically about how I like it, or why I like it, and why it has become my favorite from the brand. A brand that is actually one of my favorite AliExpress brands of all time. But I want to talk to you firstly about the couple of little differences that stand out to you about these two, because there really is only a couple. Beyond that, we can then just dive into the review of this watch. And there are a couple of differences that you are going to see as soon as you have a look on their website, because the two versions that I'm talking about, and the one that I bought first was their fluted bezel version, the S4084, a watch that comes out in 3 different variations. There's silver on silver, which is the one that I purchased. There's a 2-tone silver and gold version, and there's also a 2-tone silver and gold version with a burgundy dial. Now, the other one that has just been sent to me is a little bit different. It has a smooth bezel. That one is the S4095, and there are actually 4 variations of it. There is the silver on silver, which, well, I had to ask for that one because it is the one that I prefer and very similar to the one that I have. But there's also a silver with a grey dial, a 2-tone silver and gold watch with that silver dial, and then a 2-tone silver and gold version with that grey dial. And depending on which one you choose, depending on which variation you choose, they vary a tiny little bit in price, but approximately they cost around about $220 US. And they all have the same specifications because they are all powered by the Seiko NH35 automatic movement. They all have sunburst dials, sapphire crystals, cyclopses, 100 meters of water resistance, and they effectively have the same set of dimensions as well. The cases are 36mm, which I know does sound a little bit small, but stick with me because it's the right size for this watch. The height of the watches are 11.5mm. Plus or minus like 0.1 of a millimeter between the two. Both have a lug to lug of 43mm. Both have a lug width of 20, and both different styles of bracelets then taper down to 16mm. But because of those bracelets, I think it does affect the weight slightly. The weight of the watch with the fluted bezel and the J-style bracelet is 124 grams, and the smooth bezel with the more oyster-style bracelet is 133 grams. And I know those dimensions may put some of you off, especially the case of 36mm, and it was something that almost put me off this watch too. It was one of the things that stopped me buying it when it first came out. But let me tell you that this is the perfect set of dimensions for this watch, and I think it is because of the style of the watch. I think it is because of the shape of the case. I think it is also because of how the bracelet sort of connects and feels with this watch. But mostly, it's because of how this watch wears and especially feels on wrist. There are some watches that when you put them on, you don't even need to look at them. You can just feel them on your wrist and you can just think, wow, that feels really nice. And this is one of those watches. And I can now see why this case design, not something that is particularly original from Baltany, but the design of this case has become so popular over decades and still remains in the lineup of the watch that this one is homaging, because it does give you this amazing on-wrist feel. Now, before we dive into more of the details of this watch and why I like it so much, let's point out the specific differences about them, because there's two obvious ones. There is the bezel. The one that I bought first has a fluted bezel, having those sort of ridges, which also are then sort of polished, that then also really catch the light and actually give this watch a little bit of bling. And I think that is what the original watch has too, that sort of bling, sort of, that really dressy element to it. And it was something that absolutely put me off this design, but it really works with this design. The smooth bezel variation is a much more standard and something you would expect. It is a solid, smooth bezel that is mostly polished. The other thing that obviously stands out between these two is the bracelet. They do interchange because effectively the case is the same, but we have a Jubilee style bracelet and we have an Oyster style bracelet. And I think both of them are good. They're both very well made. They're both finished very well. They both use screw links to adjust the links. But I have to say, I really like the Jubilee style. I think it sort of works in well with the design of this watch. And because the links are then all individual, it does add to that wrist feel. It really does conform to your wrist and give a nice sort of feel sort of when you shake your wrist with the watch on. But there is one other small element that I have noticed that is slightly different between them, and that is the tops of the lugs. On the smooth bezel version, they are brushed. On the fluted bezel version, it's polished. Now, I think this was a good choice because I think it sort of breaks up the polish a bit on the more plain version of this watch, whereas that fluted bezel that gives you all this light play and movement, I don't think it needs that change or that combination of brushing and polishing together. Beyond that, I think these watches are essentially the same, including the dial. And including this specific dial because I went for both of the silver sunburst dial variations. And that silver sunburst is great and it stands out and it's lovely, but a detail about it that may not stand out to you until I point it out is on the very edge of that dial. You'll see there is another sort of area in silver that is not part of that sunburst. It has a circular sort of brushing where there is printing applied to it, which breaks up a little bit between that sunburst and then the start of the case within that dial. You'll see that everything basically sort of printed on there is done in black, except of course that Baltany logo, the applied markers, and those markers are sort of polished, so they do then match in with the rest of the case. There is little touches of lume, which I think when you turn the lights off do make it easy to read this watch because it is quite good lume. But I think this style watch isn't specifically lumed for that function. I know it is a good function to have and I know it is useful, but for me, watches like this with these little touches of lume on the markers and on those polished hands really for me make this watch feel a little bit more sporty. It takes a little bit of the dressy edge off and makes it a little bit easier to wear, and I think it's a good choice for this design. It's not an original choice from this brand, but overall I'm glad this is something that they also chose to do with this model. That dial there is covered by a piece of flat sapphire crystal with some AR coating and a very strong cyclops, something that I tend not to actually like, but it just works with this design. I think there's a lot of elements with this watch, with these watches, that just work with this specific dial that perhaps individually I wouldn't specifically like, but when you get that dial, then that cyclops, and then that bezel and the bracelet together as a whole specific thing, it just comes together and works well. The case, of course, is that oyster style case, which, yeah, I now understand why it has been so popular for so many, many years, because it just looks and feels nice in hand, and it looks and feels nice when it is then on wrist. And you may notice when I am wearing this one that you may not think that is a 36mm. I think the totality of this watch and the design and the curvature of the case and then the integration of that bracelet, I just think it ends up being the right size for this watch. Rather than trying to make a 36mm watch, they are making a watch that is just the correct size for these. I know that Baltany has released a slightly bigger version of them. It's a little bit different. And certainly I do start to think, well, that is a better size for me. But because I've owned this one, and now I have the other version of it, I can say that I don't actually think that is true. I think for this specific watch, this is the right dimensions for it. Now they both have 100 meters of water resistance, and that is achieved through a screw down crown, which of course you can action that Seiko NH35 automatic movement, which has hacking and hand winding. And it sits there quite nicely. It's very easy to use, and it is a good movement at a watch that is at this price, and I like that they have chosen to use it. Both have a fairly simple case back that I don't think we need to spend too much time on, and I've already spoken about the two bracelets, the differences and the qualities of them, but what I can say is they both have the same clasp. And it's a good clasp. There's no on-the-fly adjustment, which I know some people would prefer, but that is really a relatively new thing, and for a watch at this sort of price, I don't mind that it doesn't have it, because there are plenty of micro adjust. It's all milled, it is well made, it conforms nicely in regards to the size of it with the bracelet, and it just sort of matches the watch. Some of these sort of on-the-fly adjustment clasps in the more affordable sector tend to be a little bit big and chunky, and it would be the wrong one for this watch, unless of course they spent more money. So I think they've made the right decision here. And I think these watches are some of the first watches from Baltany that have got a bracelet attached to them. I know there are some others, but it's one of the first that I've experienced from the brand. And it is definitely something that they've done that is really nice. The bracelets are well made, they feel nice in hand, and they really balance out the head of the watch. And it just reconfirms to me why I like this brand so much. They just make nice watches, well-made watches, well-designed watches, mostly sort of non-original watches, but this one here probably tends to be a little bit less original than even some of their others, but they're not scared about saying that. If you look on their website, you'll see that they call it a date-just homage. They're not trying to shy away from that, and I quite like that about this brand. Thank you so much for watching. Maybe you'd like to watch another one of my videos next.